love you. Here's my and my here's my only
Welcome to Knife Reviews. I'm your host, Joshua Hightower. This is my partner and producer, Evan Hightower.
Hey!
You can follow us on YouTube and Facebook. Both are called Knife Reviews. We're going to be doing the SE6 next week, so tune in for that and stick with us as we go through the Fallkniven F1. The Fallkniven F1 is 8.3 inches total length with a blade length of 3.8 inches. It's got a 0.18 inch thickness on it. It has what is called a broad protruding tang. Comes out just a little bit, so you could use that as a scraper. The steel is a laminated VG10. It comes in on 59 on the HRC. The handle material is what is called a thermarun. This knife is what is considered a survival knife for the Swedish Air Force, but has in recent years garnered a gathering in the bushcraft community for its versatility. As with all of our bushcraft knives, we go through 5 categories to test it. The first one is chopping and batoning. The second category is cutting. The third category is feather sticking, followed up by spine scraping. And then the fifth would be ferro rod usage. We'll start with a very dry red cedar. At just around 1.25 inches on this branch, the knife chopped fairly well. But as with any blade that's a little bit shorter, this one being right under 4 inches, took a little bit of extra effort to get through that thickness. I apologize for the wind. As much as I like, I cannot control the weather. As I always talk about, you want to make sure that your knife that you choose has very good blade integrity, meaning that it keeps a good sharp edge maintained throughout processing of batoning and chopping, so that the entire length of the knife maintains that sharp edge, so it continues to be useful throughout the entire process. And this does seem to keep the edge very well. Like I said, with a blade that's a little bit shorter, you have to be very selective of what you are going to baton and what you're going to chop. So with anything that's thicker, this is about 5 inches thick, you want to make sure you're taking it at angles to take off pieces so that you can process at a little bit slower pace. As you can see, I went in on the tip of the knife to test what it would do by batoning on the bottom end or the heart of the blade and a little bit on the handle. It held up pretty well. I always like to try to baton through knots just to give it a very good test, and as you can see, we went through several knots here and it went right through it. Very happy with the batoning. I want to do a little bit of cross batoning. So you want to make a wedge cut by batoning. Does very, very well with that. This sharp 90-degree spine has kept up its integrity with no notches or no nicks. So for batoning and chopping, we're going to go ahead and give this an 8 out of a 10 possible points for chopping and batoning. And I knock it off for 2 points because obviously being a little bit shorter, it takes a little bit more discernment on what you're going to chop and baton with it, limiting just a bit what you're able to process. The next category that we're going to go into is cutting. Being able to cut from the tip down to the heart. Big chunks. Key importance is being able to process down for firewood, for kindling, tinder, whatever it may be, or even processing down to a bow drill kit if you don't have a ferro rod or some other means of ignition. So you have to have a blade that has the dexterity and nimbleness to create a fairly cylindrical rod for your motion. Obviously this is much too skinny, but for the sake of just showing its capabilities, this thing is actually doing quite well. Most knives can cut wood. If it's not able to cut wood, it's a knife that shouldn't even be considered. So we bring out some rope and some Gorilla Tape that's stacked 20 times to see how well it can cut that.
Oh, come on, you want to mess up the group? Oh! Whoa! Whoa! Cut rope! Oh! Nice shot! Whoa! Cool.
Does pretty well on the rope. I have no doubt that if it was honed up just a little bit, it would slice cleanly through that rope. However, we're doing this test as it would be right out of the box. A lot of knives, when they cut through cargo tape like this, it'll leave burrs and indentations where it's actually ripping the tape almost. And this is very, very clearly cutting through it quite easily. For our grade, I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10. The next category that we're going to go over for the Fallkniven F1 will be feather sticking. So for thick feather sticking, not bad. Want to get a little paper thin? I have noticed that towards the tip, it seems like there may be a little bit of thickness. It feels thicker up here, or disproportionately thicker up here than it would proportionately be down here. So it's a little bit more difficult to feather stick at the tip of it than when it be down here. That cut right there is much easier than this cut right here for some reason. and I'm not a blade geometrist by any stretch of the imagination. It definitely feels like there is some disproportionate thickness of the blade here as opposed throughout the rest of the blade. Like it flares out right here and then sticks to that same thickness throughout the rest of it. So there's a little bit of a hump almost that causes you, when you're cutting, to have to put more pressure into the blade as opposed to where you would be down here. My favorite feather sticking method is the pull method. Does pretty well. So on feather sticking, a unique discovery is the blade geometry of the knife. There's a very, very slight discrepancy for me right up here. Show it to you one more time. Where it flares out, and you can see it right in here. It flares out, and that causes it, I think, to lose some of its cutting potency right there in that area. At least for feather sticking. I didn't notice it so much when I was just cutting, but definitely on feather sticking, where I was doing more intricate detail cuts, you could feel that. And the reason that's important on feather sticking is because that would directly correlate to carving tasks such as carving wooden spoons or bowls or any camp tools like that. That definitely will affect those camp tasks. That's why feather sticking, I put that in there, is because that skill or type of cut correlates to all of the camp tasks that you would use, especially on carving spoons or any of those kind of curved cuts. And that is where that discrepancy for me would come into play. So for feather sticking, I'm definitely gonna have to give this a 7 out of 10, sadly, because of that issue. The fourth category that we're gonna go over will be spine scraping and shaving. You want to be able to get bark for tinder for your fire, and we'll get right into that. That's the stuff that we want to see when we're scraping. Another thing I wanted to try out that I haven't used on our spine scraping yet is a little magnesium tinder rod. For just a few seconds, you can see we got quite a bit of magnesium shavings off of it. So, pretty decent. So for spine scraping, we're gonna go ahead and give this a 9 out of 10. The last category that we wanna go over will be ferro rod usage. I can tell you right off the bat that it's a little bit smoother than you would optimally like, which can be fixed, but right out of the box, we'll give it a go. This is just dry wood and a little bit of those magnesium shavings. Keep blowing. We're going to go ahead and give this an 8 out of 10 overall score for ferro rod usage. Right out of the box, this is a great knife. At that $120 range, it's a very comparable knife to anything else out there. Any production knife that can do all those things that we've seen, this well is a knife that you should definitely consider. It has a few points knocked off of it for what I believe to be a little deficiency for bushcrafting. Once again, we really appreciate you spending your time with us. If you have any questions, you can reach us on Facebook at Knife Reviews, YouTube, Knife Reviews, and if you have the time, we'd appreciate you going over and subscribing to our channel, watching the other videos, giving us any input that you have. Stay tuned for next week where we give you the SC6 review. Have a wonderful day. Thank you. God bless. Do widzenia.
Do widzenia.